Theoretically, I am sharing my screen. Did you see that?
I see it, breathing from America's tailpipe.
Yeah, that's it. Good. Okay.
All right, well, let us turn this over to you, Roger.
Well, I'll turn it over to Alan in a minute. Let me just introduce him. Dr. Alan Greenglass, I have met him only on Zoom when we've had some mutual interests in issues of climate and justice. He is a representative, and I don't know his official title in the Mid-Atlantic Alliance for Climate and Health, but he is also past president of Physicians for Social Responsibility. And that is a group that was formed as, I think in 1961, as a counter to all the talk about, oh, we're going to be able to survive nuclear war. And so all the children, when they had their little drills, would duck and cover and hide under their desks. And I remember being marched out into the hallway. I remember going down into the basement of the junior high school and into the place where the floor was not even a poured concrete, and huddling there for some reason, believing, I guess, that we could survive a nuclear war. And the Physicians for Social Responsibility said, well, essentially, that's BS. we can't have a nuclear war. And even today, if you go onto their website, you see that averting nuclear war and nuclear Armageddon is the first thing on the website, and the second thing is climate change. So I will turn it over to Alan. We worked together on the slides, but he's the expert. And Alan, introduce yourself further if you need to, and let's go ahead.
Sure, thank you. Well, thank you for inviting me. And thank you for your interest in this topic, and also for your advocacy and actions that you've been working on, both on this topic and issue and other issues for social justice. And yes, I'm a co-founder of the Mid-Atlantic Alliance. Probably you haven't heard of it before, but about a year plus ago, 5 physicians got together, 5 Delawareans, 4 Delawareans and 1 physician from New Jersey got together and said they'd like to bring the health voice to conversations about climate change and public policy. And right now we're 18 organizations, and it's basically an alliance of alliances. It's not a formally incorporated organization, but once again, there are groups such as the Sierra Club, the Delaware Academy of Medicine, the Medical Society of Delaware, the professional organizations representing internists, pediatricians, family physicians, and gynecologists in Delaware, as well as pediatricians in New Jersey, Physicians for Social Responsibility in Philadelphia. So we all agreed to work together, share information, help each other understand what's going on, and when possible, to support each other's initiatives when it comes to the environment and climate. And I'm a retired internist, primary care internist. I was also a healthcare executive most recently at Christiana Care, and retired from that a few years ago. And I live in Delaware, northern Delaware. Why don't we go to the next slide? Okay. And before and the slides will be made available, and also as a prelude to the conversation tonight, Roger distributed a podcast that I and a colleague from Philadelphia were part of about a year plus ago, that was moderated by a physician named Al Rizzo, who's a pulmonary physician here in Delaware, and also the chief medical officer for the American Lung Association nationally. And so if you get a chance to listen to some of that, you'll get the gist of what I'm talking about this evening. And also the slides will help a little bit. We're not going to dwell on the slides because I'd rather get to a little bit of a conversation. But in further way of introduction, my main premise this evening is that climate change is happening now, and that people in our community are already affected by that change, as well as by poor air quality that's caused by burning fossil fuels. And these impacts have a severe human and financial cost and will only get worse without aggressive actions. Some people deny that there's a problem and say that it's not caused by humans, or that Delawareans and other Americans are not to blame, or that we can't fix things because the Chinese won't do anything about it, or that we just need to let the market do its job. These arguments are at best incorrect interpretations of the facts or misleading, and at their worst, they're falsehoods, which are designed to mislead us, to confuse the public and public officials, and to delay taking action. These are the same strategies, unfortunately, that were used by the tobacco industry to continue to addict millions, tens of millions of people to nicotine, and to burden people around the world with poor health and expensive medical care. If you're interested more in that topic of how, unfortunately, industries and leaders who we should be trusting to help us came to deliver us instead with misinformation about tobacco or acid rain, about lead in our gasoline, about the use of seat belts. There's a great resource, a book called Merchants of Doubt, which was written by Naomi Oreskes from Harvard and Eric Conway, a journalist, a few years ago, and talks about how misinformation campaigns have been used, unfortunately, by industry to delay activity or actions. So, having said that, though, I want to look at the positive tonight. So there'll be lots of stuff which will make you worried, right? But my desired outcome of this conversation is to be sure that you know the facts. You can explain those facts to others and help them understand what's going on and what needs to be done, and that you know what you can do as individuals and as a community to protect and improve our climate, our air quality, and our health. Because there are things which are being done, which can be done further, and which are having a positive impact. So I want to start off by letting you know a great resource. The American Lung Association each year puts out something called the State of the Air report. And what it is, it's a compilation of EPA and statewide data from around the country that lets anybody put in your zip code or address and get an idea of what the air quality is in your community. And it's interesting. I met up with a former colleague, a physician, a very smart fellow, who's a radiation oncologist recently. And I said, we were talking about what I was doing, and he said, "Oh, but I live up here in Greenville, Delaware. Our air quality is great." And it turns out that's not the case. So if you go into the State of the Air report, you'll see that Northern Delaware, as well as Chester County, Delaware County, Philadelphia, Camden, is given an F by the EPA and by the Lung Association for smog, which is also called ground level ozone. And it's given a C for particulates, PM 2.5, which is soot, which comes from the burning of fossil fuel. And some people will tell you it's not our fault, but it is partly our fault. Our air is partly air that we produce in Delaware, and it's partly air that comes from downstream, that comes from Maryland, comes from West Virginia, Pennsylvania, and Ohio, where unfortunately we've outsourced a lot of the coal-fired power plants that produce our electricity. So PM 2.5 and ozone are problems in Delaware. They're problems for our air quality, and not just in Newcastle County, but also in Sussex and Kent County, especially ozone. We also have an indoor air quality problem. So if you burn natural gas in your furnace, or if you use gas to cook your food, and you haven't checked to be sure that your ventilation system works properly, you can also have an indoor air quality problem. And or if you have a poorly insulated home and have mold in your home, you'll also potentially have an indoor air quality problem. So these are things that can and do impact the health of Delawareans. And even for folks, many of us who might live in communities where we think we're not part of the problem, we are, because our electricity is being made with fossil fuels, whether it's at Indian Point or in Pennsylvania or in Maryland or Ohio or West Virginia. Let's go to the next slide. And if you have questions as we go along, please raise your hand, interrupt, and I'm going to go through this pretty quickly, so hopefully we'll have time for questions later on. But here's a page taken out of the State of the Air report from the American Lung Association. High ozone days, particle pollution annually, and 24-hour pollution. I will tell you that the EPA is working under old standards for particle pollution. So even though we currently get a passing grade for annual air pollution in our region, it turns out doesn't mean we have healthy air, because by current standards, scientific and medical standards, we don't have healthy air for particles in our community. What happened was our previous administration and federal government in Washington refused to update the standards. And the EPA, and so we're working on standards which were based upon scientific data from 15 years ago. The EPA is now looking at updating the standards so that in the next, perhaps a year or two from now, when this report comes out again, we'll have a more accurate representation of how our air quality in our community impacts the health of people who live in our community. And just to let you know, there are a whole lot of people who live around here, a whole lot of pediatric asthma. Delaware has one of the highest prevalences of pediatric asthma in the country, as well as adult asthma. We have one of the highest prevalences of pregnancy complications and infant mortality in the country. Both of those, as well as everything else on the list you see here, are impacted by poor air quality. And once again, any of you can go in and look at air quality in your own community. And on any day, you can Google air quality in your community and see what's going on in terms of the AQI, which will tell you about particulates and ozone, and as well as allergens where you live. So let's go on. I think I've covered this a little bit, that our air comes from, not just from Delaware, from elsewhere, and does not know the geographic boundary. And because much of our electricity that Delmarva produces is made in those other states, other regions, using coal and natural gas or gas, that although we don't produce all of our own electricity ourselves, those power plants, the exhaust from those power plants follow the prevailing winds and blow across our state. We do still burn coal at Indian River. That power plant has just been given the permission by the Delaware Public Utility Commission to operate for 4 more years than it was predicted or expected to operate. So we continue to produce soot from coal-fired power plants in Delaware as well as elsewhere. I didn't mention that most of the ozone that's produced is produced here in Delaware itself, and it comes from chemical plants and from gasoline internal combustion vehicles that traverse our state, especially from diesel vehicles. The Delaware City Refinery is on this slide. Today I heard of an interesting new resource called Climate Trace, TRACE, that Al Gore is involved in making available. You can Google it, look for the website, and you can see that the biggest source of emissions in Delaware is that refinery, the Delaware City Refinery. So not only does it help pollute our air, but it then blows into New Jersey, the pollutants. And also on the slide, a little bit about gasoline, leaf blowers, weed whackers, lawn mowers. An amazingly high amount of our air quality is impacted by lawn equipment. Just another note, as the temperatures get hotter, more ozone will be produced because ozone is produced from volatile organic compounds and from car exhaust, diesel exhaust, that undergoes a chemical reaction in sunlight and catalyzed by heat. So as temperatures are higher, we make more ground level ozone. Let's go on. I think we mentioned this a little bit, more hospitalizations, more premature deaths. Worldwide, millions of people die each year from air pollution. In the United States, it's estimated that between 100 and 200,000 deaths per year related to air pollution from respiratory and lung disease, respiratory and heart disease. Also, it was found, unfortunately, that there were more deaths in communities with poor air quality from COVID. And that's because both the coronavirus and particulates, PM 2.5 refers to the size in microns of particulates, which can get into the lungs and travel into the bloodstream. Both the coronavirus and those particulates activate the same receptor in our lungs, cause inflammation. So they work synergistically, and that it's estimated that in the United States and elsewhere, there's an excess mortality of about 18% from COVID in communities with poor air quality. And unfortunately, our community in Northern Delaware would qualify in that as a risk factor. So let's go on. Other impacts, unfortunately, of climate change. I've talked to, what I was talking about just previously was mostly air quality. And once again, and the good news is, if we clean up our air, even if we continue to have climate change to some degree, if we clean up our air, health impacts will start to get better almost immediately. And with those impacts means fewer kids with asthma, fewer people having heart problems because of hot days and air quality and poor air quality. And also significant financial savings because people won't miss as much work, they won't need as much medication, they won't be in the emergency room because of climate, air quality related health problems. These other problems, increased storms, problems with increased heat, extreme heat, they will continue for some time even after we clean up our air, but they won't get worse at the same rate before they start getting better if we clean up our air. Something I just heard this evening is that we can attribute $50 to $60 billion a year in property damage related to extreme weather events, such as the two hurricanes that just went through Florida one a month ago, one yesterday. So there's another reason to try to combat climate change, not just health impacts, but property damage impacts from climate change. Next slide. I think this kind of repeats a little bit of what we've already been talking about. Here we go. Heat island effects. I know that some of the congregations in Wilmington are working with Delaware Interfaith Power and Light on extreme heat, combating extreme heat events. I know that I'm also doing work with Interfaith Power and Light on that. Good data that inner cities the temperature can be 5 to 20 degrees higher than in suburban communities. And that's because of the trucks, buses, automobiles. It's because of the amount of blacktop. It's because we've removed trees and limited green spaces in urban areas. So there are things that can be done, and we can certainly talk later if you have questions about what activities people in Wilmington or Dover or in our inner cities can take. Unfortunately, many of us have the opportunity or the resources to live in places where there are more trees, so it's not as we don't get that heat island effect to the same impact, or to have homes or vacation places where we can cool ourselves by the water. That's not available to everybody, and it is a significant environmental justice impact. I think pretty self-explanatory here, and I've already touched on some of these issues. I want to talk about healthcare itself. One of the reasons why we formed the Mid-Atlantic Alliance for Climate and Health is we realized that not much was being done in our communities, local communities, by the healthcare sector to either limit their own contribution of greenhouse gases or to help their neighboring communities. Around the country, this is not the case. Around the country, there are many healthcare institutions who have aggressively done things to limit their carbon footprint. So you see the Cleveland Clinic, Mass General, Boston Medical, the Kaiser Permanente, the Intermountain Healthcare in the Mountain States. They've all done such things as aggressively switching to renewable energy resources, solar and/or wind. They've started to electrify their fleets of vehicles. They've changed the anesthetic agents they've used to ones which are not potent greenhouse gases. They've started to decrease the amount of plastics and disposables they use in their institutions. And they fought back to the idea that this is not a public health issue, that some people would tell them it's not a health issue. It is a health issue. It's a public health issue. And a little data here. The healthcare industry in the United States contributes to around 10% of the greenhouse gases, which is significantly higher than what healthcare industries do in other countries. And unfortunately, without a discernible improvement in quality in healthcare in this country compared to, for example, in Europe. So it is a health issue, and that's one of the reasons we got together, to convince and to help our healthcare systems in Delaware and New Jersey and Pennsylvania that there were things that could be done, and I've just outlined a number of them, and that it's not so hard, and that it's also financially feasible, and it's better for their communities. And let's go on. So I'm going to stop here and see if there are any questions about what I've been talking about, because I want to spend really the rest of the time talking about things that we can do, not just, gee, here's everything bad happening, but what, once again, as I said earlier, what we as individuals or as communities and as organizations can do, and what we've already been doing. Any questions about any of the things I've put forward about what's going on with air quality, climate change, and how it impacts the health of our families or our neighbors?
Alan,
ahead,
I did have one more slide. I'm going to try and show that now. And what is this one? There we go. And see something that's coming up.
Okay.
This is coming up on Monday.
Right, and I was going to touch on that.
Okay.
And actually, there's also another slide that I'm going to talks about some of the things that we can do. But any questions about the data? If not, let me just add a few things. I said earlier that there's some people who would say, if we don't do anything, why should we do anything? Because it's too expensive and too hard if China doesn't do anything. And there are folks in Delaware who argue that the state should not take action on climate. And this is one of their prime arguments. We can't, we're just, China's much bigger than us. And I'm going to give two answers to that. So if one of your neighbors or family members tells you that, and that is, per person, we emit greenhouse gases in the United States significantly higher than the Chinese or the Europeans or the people in India, all those places where fingers get pointed that it's their fault and not ours. Per person, we emit much more. So that's one part of the reason. Clearly, there are many more people in Asia than there are in the United States, and so in the aggregate, unfortunately, China exceeds what we emit, but per person, we emit much more. And so that's an opportunity. That's what one is to explain why I think that's a misleading figure that you'll hear from folks, but it's also an opportunity for us to do better. The second part of the answer is, since the beginning of the Industrial Revolution, Europe and the United States have been significantly the leaders in greenhouse gas emissions. So we've caused the problem that we've gotten to right now. So you'll hear, if you follow the conversations from the COP27 conference, which is just started this week in Egypt, once again, as the most recent COP conferences, the developing nations are saying, well, one is, we need to raise our standards of living. You need to help us with that. You need to help us with green alternatives to fossil fuels, but also we're most at risk. So where's the investment to help mitigate the conditions that you've created over the last 150, 200 years? So if you hear that argument, please say, hey, it's not that simple. It's not that China's the reason why we're in this hole, this problem, and how we got here. And they're not the only ones. We all have to work together to improve things. Similarly, I hear the argument from the same folks that, the air in Delaware is coming from elsewhere, and it's not our fault. But the ground level ozone is mostly our fault. And the particulates are our fault because we're asking Delmarva to burn fossil fuels to supply us electricity. And they're burning some of it here in Delaware, but they're burning a lot of it downwind from us. And that air is coming through Delaware, not just in Newcastle County, but in Kent and Sussex. So I think that's a couple of points I want to be sure people are aware of. Okay, so what can we do about it? Unless there are other questions about how we got here and why it's bad. Well, I guess one other point I want to make. There's good data that if we invest in alternative energy sources, we will not only improve the health of our families and our neighbors, which is certainly important to me as a physician who spent his career thinking about what we call the social determinants of health and population health. But we will save money, and we'll save money in two ways. One is by having a healthier population, a healthier, more productive population. As it gets hotter, people are not as productive on their jobs. Those people have to work outdoors. As we have more extreme heat days and more days in which it's unhealthy to exercise or to work outside, we lose productivity. We have more people who get sick. On those extreme heat days, there are more kids going to emergency rooms, more older people going to emergency rooms. This is reproducible data, not just in this country, but around the world. And that's expensive. That drives up the cost of health insurance. That drives up the cost of medications. It's a productivity issue. It's a human benefit issue of having people who can't achieve the fullness of their lives because they have asthma and they can't go outside because the air quality isn't good, or they can't go to work because their work involves outdoor activity. So that's one point. It will be less expensive after the initial investment, and there'll be a payback if we have cleaner air. The other point is that renewables in many parts of the country are now less expensive than fossil fuels. Coal is one of the most expensive fossil fuels to burn, not just because of the pollution impact, but because of how it's produced and because of how inefficient the coal-fired power plants are. Sun and wind are exceptionally efficient ways of producing electricity. Coal and what's called natural gas, which is basically methane, a highly pollutant greenhouse gas, are very inefficient sources of energy, whether we're burning them for electricity or oil the same way, or if we put them in our vehicles and drive around. So what can we do? I'll try to go from kind of simplest individual activities to more complex. We have to get together as communities to make it happen. And Roger, we'll probably want to get back at some point to that slide talking about the event that the Sierra Club's putting on for this coming Monday. So one is we can reduce the meat in our diets, right? Unfortunately, meat, especially beef products and pork, the way we produce those animals is a large source of methane. Methane is a more potent greenhouse gas than carbon dioxide. It doesn't stay in the atmosphere as long as carbon dioxide, but it's 10 to 40 times as potent in trapping heat in the atmosphere. And I think if you go to that website, I mentioned Climate Trace, which I just learned about today, and I think Al Gore just announced in the last few days its existence. you can you can look at a map, look at a community, see what the greenhouse gases are being emitted by Delaware City Refinery, by landfills downstate, and you'll be able to see the methane release production, carbon dioxide production, and then the carbon dioxide equivalent in that community. So we can reduce methane by reducing our consumption of meat. We can also reduce carbon dioxide emissions by reducing our consumption of meat, because the fertilizers which produce the feed for meat products are also made using in a carbon intense fashion, and are made from carbon and nitrogen. So made from greenhouse gases, basically. So once again, we could decrease the meat in our diets, and we could eat more food produced locally, because the average piece of food that ends up on our plates in this country travels 1,000 miles to get to us. That means it was trucked or put on a train, which burned diesel fuel. So the more local food we buy or grow in our own gardens, the smaller carbon footprint that food has. Next, we can limit the use of gas-powered lawn equipment, as Roger included on one of our slides. Not only is it noise pollution, which I think you all know, when our landscapers show up on Saturday morning, right, or to cut our grass, but it's carbon pollution. Many communities around the country have banned the use of gas-powered equipment. Westchester County in New York State, for example, many of the towns there have banned the use of gasoline-powered equipment. That means the landscapers need to make a transition. So if you do your own lawn, have your own gas-powered leaf blowers, the price of battery-operated equipment is exceptionally competitive now with gas-powered equipment, and quieter as well as less polluting. Or you can encourage your landscaper to buy an electric leaf blower instead of a gas leaf blower. Community solar or home solar electricity. Delaware now has a law that provides for community solar to be developed in Delaware. It probably won't be available to us for another couple of months, while the regulations are being written by DENREC. But when that becomes available, any of us will be able to invest money or pay a small monthly fee for solar, which will be produced in our communities or elsewhere in the state. So community solar will become available to us. Or if you live downstate, there's a electricity co-op, which provides electricity from solar power that you can become a member of. Or once again, under the IRA, the new federal law, there'll be stronger incentives for individuals to put solar on their homes.
Alan, we just committed a contract for solar panels on our community hall. And one of the persuading factors was the 30% subsidy for nonprofits under the Inflation Reduction Act for solar. So that's, we're taking advantage of that. We saw that coming and hopped right on it. So I'm very pleased that we've made that commitment.
Yeah. And I think my next point also speaks to what a congregation can do. And I know, once again, Interfaith Power and Light is helping congregations throughout the state with some of these topics, is energy audits and retrofits. You can do that as a homeowner, heavily subsidized audits. You would contact Energize Delaware if that's something you were interested in, and also subsidization of energy retrofits based upon that audit. So whether it's better insulation or better windows or mold remediation or LED bulbs, those are all available with an energy audit through an organization such as Energize Delaware. And if that's something you've already done or you don't want to do it, you can also help support the organizations which are providing those services for your community, such as Habitat for Humanity is doing that, and once again, Energize Delaware. Electric heat pumps and geothermal instead of oil and gas furnaces. So if you're a homeowner and you have a fossil fuel furnace, and you know that it's coming to the end of its lifespan, which generally is going to be 10 to 15 years, look into what you're going to do when it's time to replace that. Because there are strong subsidies in the Inflation Reduction Act for both for heat pumps, whether they're air heat pumps or geothermal. If you have land that you can put a geothermal system in. About 9 years ago, in our home, we replaced our oil furnace with geothermal. Even then, there were subsidies from the state and federal tax credits. The payback for us was about 5 years, and it means, and we gained some space in our basement because we didn't need the oil tank anymore. And we don't have that oil truck coming every month or two, burning diesel fuel and helping pollute our air. So look into that. Support wind power in Delaware. There's a proposal for a project off the Delaware coast, 20 miles off. It may need legislative approval. There are a lot of people fighting against it, which is for various reasons, saying we need to protect the whales, or it won't look good. These wind turbines, which are proposed 20 miles off our coast, will look like matchsticks if they're visible at all to folks at the beach. And guess what? Maryland is several years ahead of us, and they're going to be putting up wind turbines off the Delaware coast, but feeding through Delaware into Maryland, the electricity. So they're going to be out there, and New Jersey is also several years ahead of us. But there are folks saying that we don't need it in Delaware because we're not the problem. We are. We get 60% of our electricity from fossil fuels. And just the project recommended in Delaware would allow us to eliminate about a third of the fossil fuels we burn for electricity for our state, with a significant healthcare savings. But because our air will be cleaner. The healthcare savings alone would pay back the cost of putting the wind turbines in. So once again, if you hear misinformation, it's going to kill the whales. It'll be an eyesore. We don't need it. It's too hard. Get the facts. You can get the facts from the League of Women Voters, and the Sierra Club, which are spearheading the initiative. You can get in touch with Senator Stephanie Hansen, who's the chair of the State Senate Environmental Committee that's looking at the issue of legislation for offshore wind. You can get in touch with Professor Willett Kempton at UD, who's an international expert on wind power and electricity. So arm yourself with the facts and support those folks who are doing the work. There's something called the Regional Greenhouse Gas Initiative, which Delaware has been part of for the last 10 years. And it's one reason that our air is actually cleaner than it was 10 years ago, because it's a cap and trade, basically. And you'll hear people say cap and trade can't work. And the entire East Coast, from Virginia to Maine, has been part of the Regional Greenhouse Gas Initiative. And once again, up and down the East Coast, our air is cleaner. And this is a cap and trade for power plants. And as an aside, much of the money that comes to energize Delaware comes from the cap and trade fees, which are paid to the state through the Regional Greenhouse Gas Initiative. So when you have a free energy audit, it's not being paid for by Delmarva. It's being paid by money that's coming from the state, because our utilities, electricity utilities, have had to pay because they haven't been decreasing their use of fossil fuels fast enough. So don't think Delmarva is being philanthropic. It's because the governors and the governments of the East Coast states got together and took a stand 10 years ago. Unfortunately, as it gets hotter, that's going to be a problem. It's going to turn around the positive effects of the Regional Greenhouse Gas Initiative. So you can speak up with your legislators in your communities for the standards for RGGI to be strengthened, for the caps to be stronger, so that Delmarva is not allowed to burn fossil fuel for 60% of their fuels for their electricity. So that's something as a community can do. Some of these earlier things are what you can do as individuals. Eat less meat, buy foods that are produced locally, community solar, your own home, your own congregation, energy audits, heat pumps. Supporting wind power in Delaware is more of a community-based effort. Strengthening RGGI is a community-based effort. And then I think the last thing I'll talk about, last two things, are support the electrification of the school bus fleet in Delaware. There is federal funding to electrify school buses throughout the country. There's a group, once again, through the League of Women Voters and Sarah Club, and through the Mid-Atlantic Alliance for Climate and Health, to encourage the state to apply, and school boards throughout the state to apply for federal funding to electrify school buses. School buses, diesel school buses, if you ride a diesel school bus, which I did, I think many of you probably did, the diesel fumes are concentrated in the school bus to be 2 or 3 times greater than the diesel amount of diesel exhaust on the streets that the school bus is driving through. In this country, kids who live in urban, lower income communities are 50% more likely to ride diesel school buses than kids who live in more affluent communities. So this is not just a health problem, because as I said, Delaware has one of the highest incidences of pediatric asthma in the country. And diesel fuel exposure is one of the highest risk factors for that. Okay, it's not only a health problem, it's an environmental justice problem, because the kids who are riding the buses, the kids with the oldest buses are in the lower income parts of our state and of every state. It's not just us. So I will tell you that the state of Delaware has dragged its heels to apply for the federal money, despite the fact that Tom Carper put the section in the legislation that supplied the funding for the diesel, for electrification of school buses. We could have applied for 25 electric school buses this year. We have a fleet of 1,800 school buses in Delaware, almost all diesel. We could have applied for 25. The state only applied for 14 and only was allowed to get 3 electric school buses out of 1,800, almost all diesel school buses. So that's something you could do. If you want more information about the folks who are doing this, one of them is Dr. Ann Quizell, who lives in Wilmington, and others, Dr. Stephanie Malius, who's a family physician in Wilmington. They're spearheading the school bus initiative, working with a number of organizations, including myself and the Sierra Club and League of Women Voters.
Alan, who needs to make that decision?
It's the Department of Transportation, Department of Education, and DENREC.
Okay, so there's an opportunity to make voices heard with those 3 organizations.
And you can also apply, you can also let your elected representatives know, and your local school buses know, school boards know.
Yep.
Red Clay School District did apply for funds, did not receive any.
And why was that?
It's not clear. It's not clear. One is there. It seemed as though that we may have been outcompeted because more people across the country were applying for the funds than there were funds allocated for this fiscal year. It could be because it's more affluent in general school district. Colonial received the funding for 3 buses. And it may be that in the point system that the federal EPA used, that they were looking at communities that had a greater need in terms of not being able to invest on their own, for example. So I think the only people who know the real answer are the folks at DOT in Delaware, because and Department of Education. The Department of Education was the lead agency. Unfortunately, the responsibility in Delaware is very diffuse. There's a local school boards, there's DOT, DENREC, and DOE, and unfortunately, they all pointed. I'm sorry, the phone's ringing. They all pointed their fingers at each other.
Right.
And the last thing I want to mention.
It always happens. It always happens.
No, it's a spam.
Of course it is.
They
all are.
I think folks are still want to raise money for the recent campaign, which is not bad, but I don't need to talk to them. Actually, so the last thing that you can do is get involved with the zero emission vehicle initiative in Delaware, and maybe once I finish speaking in a minute, Roger, maybe you want to put the slide up now and I'll keep talking. The federal government has given each state the ability to either adopt the California zero emission vehicle standards or the weaker federal standards. So far, 13 states have agreed to adopt the California standard. You may recall that the previous administration in Washington tried to stop California from having more rigorous standards than the rest of the country. The courts said that they could not stop California. And now this administration has encouraged states to adopt the California standard on a voluntary basis. Those standards that California has adopted are called the Advanced Clean Car Rule, Advanced Clean Cars 2 Rule, ACC 2. And basically, this says that there has to be a glide path over the next 10 years in California and the states that agree to these standards to move for all their vehicles, cars, buses, trucks, light and heavy duty trucks, to lower emission, such as hybrid, and then to zero emission vehicles, basically electric or hydrogen. And in March, Governor Carney agreed that Delaware would adopt these standards. And right now, DNREC is leading an effort to write regulations. I and a number of other people, about 25 other people, have been on the advisory group to DNREC on this. There are people in the state who don't want this to happen. Once again, they feel it's not our problem. Our air is not dirty. We don't have a health problem because of pollution. It's not our fault. And why should we have to change? The Sierra Club and the Natural Resources Defense Council are putting on a public information session, actually several sessions, or a session this Monday. DNREC is having public information sessions where both public can speak out next week and give their opinions. To be sure, there will be people opposed to this. The people, for example, who represent the auto mechanics, because unfortunately, they'll have to learn how to take care of electric vehicles, and as internal combustion engines are phased out over the next 10 to 15 years. The people who feel that the government should not have a role in determining what happens in our climate, who feel that the market will make the change for us, as though the cigarette companies were going to allow the market to make the changes which have improved the health of Delawareans. So if you want to get together as individuals or as a community, learn more about this through the Sierra Club, through their website, through the webinar they're putting on. Speak up. Let once again, Senator Hansen know how you feel about it if she's your representative. Let the Lieutenant Governor know, who's very interested in climate and health issues because she's a nurse and a healthcare educator. So let her know how you feel about things such as this, which impact the health of Delawareans. And you know, don't talk. What I would suggest is don't talk about necessarily the moral imperative to have a cleaner environment for our children and grandchildren, but talk about the health and financial impacts if we don't take action, and that the actions are not that hard if we do them together with the states and people who live in our region. So I think that's all I have to say. Any questions? I'm encouraging you to take individual, personal action, and also community, organizational and community action. The nice thing about Delaware is you can run into Bethany Hall Longer, Lieutenant Governor, on the street, right? Maybe she's part of your congregation. Or
Senator Carper is.
Senator Carper, right. So, and he seems to be, you know, I'm really impressed since I moved to Delaware 16 years ago that he's almost everywhere. You know, any public event, he's there. So, you know, take advantage of that 2 degree of separation that you have in Delaware, and you know, let people know that you care about these things. Anything else? Any questions you have for me, or things you can do or not do, or why it's important to do this thing or that thing?
Alan, you gave us a lot to think about, and I have signed up for that 6 p.m. Monday little webinar to understand more about the ACC2.
Yeah.
And I'm sure that I'll follow up with letters to my representative and my senator and whoever DENREC says I should talk to about ACC too.
Yeah, what I've said to folks, Senator Hansen and the people at DENREC is, if I had $1 million to invest or $50 million, whatever it's going to be, whatever number you put on it, I'd put it into changing our school buses first. That, putting a Tesla in every driveway, that's not going to have the impact on the health of folks as quickly as taking a diesel school bus out of service and putting kids on an electric school bus. But if we can do both, then knowing that these things don't happen overnight, and to get something done that's going to have an impact 5 and 10 years from now, you have to start now, or you have to start 5 years ago, then we should do everything we can. There's not one single silver bullet, and let's take any action we can. So, Sally, you have a question or comment?
The DENREC workshops, do you know where they're going to be? It sounds like they're
Zoom. They're Zoom.
They're Zoom. Okay.
Yeah, you can get online to register
Good, great.
for them.
Good. Thank you.
Yeah. There's lots of stuff going on. I've only touched on some of them. There's work being done about extreme heat. As I said, I didn't get deep into that. There's work being done on indoor air quality that Habitat's been involved with and Energize Delaware, especially downstate. There's work being done on water pollution issues downstate. Unfortunately, we have one of the highest number of polluted waterways in the country in Delaware. Mostly down, a lot of those are downstate because of the agricultural and poultry industry. And so there's a lot of work that environmental groups are doing down there. If you're interested, you don't have to join any of these groups, but if you're interested in more, get onto their websites, like the Sierra Club and Delaware Interfaith Power and Light and Citizens Climate Lobby. And if you see something that you like and you want to support it, you can either get involved and be part of those groups, or you can send them a couple of dollars and help them do their work.
Thank you so much, Dr. Greenglass, for sharing all of this with us. There's so much that's going on. One of the things one of the things we know is that Delaware is a small state, and for legislators and others who are responsible for organizations within the governmental structure, hearing a relatively few voices makes a difference. And one of the things that we hope in providing these educational events every week is that we all learn more and we become more aware of both the issues and the needs, and also the possibilities for action. And so one of the things we need to focus on as we leave each of these events is for each of us to say, what have we learned? What have we heard that resonates with each of us? And what action can we take to make our voices heard, to make a difference in the decisions that are made within the governmental structure or the bureaucratic structure within the state, so that the right decisions are made. I think this school bus issue sounds like a really pivotal opportunity for us, and each of us should learn more about it in the context of what the state is doing and what the school districts are doing, and make sure that those who are either elected or appointed to serve our best interests know what we care about and what we want to see done. And the more voices they hear, the more impact we will have. So I appreciate your sharing so many of these opportunities with us. I have a ton of questions, like, why was Indian River allowed to continue for 4 more years? And I mean, there's a ton of stuff here. but
Yeah.
there's some actions to be taken. There's some things to be done. And I hope that each one of us will find the avenue to make our voices heard.
Yeah. To answer the Indian River question, my understanding is that they said it was going to be too hard to work with the grid operator.
Yeah, it's like, you know, school desegregation, all deliberate speed. Let's take 12 years to do that.
Right, right, and that's what some
been
folks
there,
would,
done that. Yep.
yeah, that's what some folks would say. Don't worry,
right.
we have plenty of time. And the point
Okay.
that what you make is there are health consequences now.
Right.
It's costly to the humans. It's costly financially.
Yep.
And that could get better really quickly if we clean up our air. And that's let's do it.
Let's speak up. Yep.
Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Roger?
Thank you. I'm good. A lot of things to do. And
just choose one to start with.
Choose one.
Just pick one.
Yeah.
There's so many. Right. No problem. Okay.
Yeah.
Well, we look forward to seeing you all next week. We're going to have a really intriguing program that will feature the Reverend Dr. Lloyd Casson, Rector Emeritus of Episcopal Church of St. Andrew and Matthew. So it's his perspective on his history as a Black man, a Black child, actually, and a Black man growing up in Wilmington. And we are hoping to have him here also to be part of the dialogue that follows his really inspiring video done as part of the Elders Speak program done by the Delaware Historical Society. So we hope to see you all here next Thursday. In the meantime, have a great week. Speak up, make your voice heard. Let's go.
Thanks, everyone. Thank you so
Alan.
much, Dr.
Nice. Good night.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Good night.
Bye-bye.
Good night.